Hi everyone. So we'll start with the last part of chapter 16 on endocrine system. So this part will talk about firstly we'll start talking about adrenal gland. So that is also an endocrine gland, right? So where is this gland located? It's located on top of the kidney, right? That's why it is called a suprarenal gland. It's a pyramid shaped gland. So if your kidney is like this, then the adrenal gland kind of sits on top of that. Okay, so that's why it is called a suprarenal gland, because renal means kidney, right? So on top of the kidney. Structurally and functionally, there is two set of glands in one: adrenal cortex, which is nothing but the three layer of glandular tissue, and each layer will produce its own hormone, set of hormones. And then finally adrenal medulla. It's actually kind of a nervous tissue, and that is part of the sympathetic nervous system. So adrenal cortex, this actually sets there are adrenal cortex have three layers: zona glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticularis, and they actually produce, each of these layers actually produce their own set of hormones, which is own, like glomerulosa will produce mineralocorticoids, which is a bunch of hormone. Fasciculata will produce corticoids, and reticularis will produce gonadocorticoids. Okay, so all together they are called as corticosteroids, and approximately there are about 24 different hormones produced from these three layers. But they're not generally stored too much in the cell, but it's synthesized as it is required. Okay. um, we will talk about them, all of them. So these are the three layers: zona glomerulosa, fasciculata, reticularis, and finally the adrenal medulla. You should be able to see these slides in lab though, although I'm not going to ask you to identify these layers in exam, in lecture. So mineralocorticoid, so this is actually now who secretes this? The zona glomerulosa, the top layer, right? So this top layer actually secretes the mineralocorticoids. And what does it do? It regulates the electrolyte concentration, which is sodium potassium, in the extracellular fluid. And the most important one is the aldosterone. Aldosterone is the most important mineral corticoid that stimulates the sodium reabsorption in kidney. All right, and also stimulates the potassium elimination by kidney. The next one is the glucocorticoid, and glucocorticoid is secreted by the middle layer, which is this one, the zona fasciculata. So glucocorticoid, what it does, it influences the metabolism in most cells, keep the blood glucose level relatively constant. The most important glucocorticoid that we have, human beings, is called as cortisol. There are other ones also, cortisone or corticosterone, but they're not very significant. The only one that is very much significant in our body is cortisol. um, if there is hypersecretion of glucocorticoids, what it can create is Cushing's disease, okay, or Cushing syndrome, which actually depresses the cartilage or bone formation or immune system. It inhibits the inflammation, it can disrupt neural and cardiovascular activity, as well as gastrointestinal function, which might result in odd type of tumor formation in pituitary, lungs, pancreas, or basically over usage of corticosteroid hormones. All right. um, Sorry, corticosteroid hormones. So basically, because these tumors and these things happens, sometimes the face of this patient might look like moon face. Their face is little bit round. Treatment is removal of this of the tumor. For example, same person before onset of excess of glucocorticoid might was like this, and then after onset we might see this buffalo bump because of the hump that are fat being deposited, because the metabolism has been disrupted here, right? The gastrointestinal function, neural function, bone formation, that is disrupted. So some form of a tumor or hump formation have happened. Then the last one is the gonadocorticoid, which is produced by the third layer, which is reticularis, zona reticularis. So these actually produces weak androgen, which is a male hormone, male sex hormone, which is converts into testosterone into males, and then also some into estrogen. Example DHEA, which may contribute to onset of puberty and appearance of secondary sex characteristic is the sex drive. It can cause, like, because it is producing estrogen, we can cause sex drive in woman, and this also is the main source of estrogen after a woman has gone have hit menopause. So after menopause, this will be the main source of estrogen in a woman's body. So let's just understand, because adrenal gland is heavily related to stress factors. So suppose you are stressed for time being, for the time being, what will happen? We do know that our sympathetic system at that time is triggered. So what happens? So you have some form of a stressor, action potential will stimulate, and then you will start working. The sympathetic system will start working. The preganglionic sympathetic neuron, if you remember, they secrete the epinephrine neurotransmitters, and that will affect the adrenal medulla. All right, and adrenal medulla, what will it will do? It will create actually more, and I mean this whole actually will start creating more epinephrine, norepinephrine kind of hormones or neurotransmitters. So this will, what it will do, it will actually, these production of these hormones or will actually trigger our sympathetic nervous system responses. If you remember that, for example, cardiovascular effects, for example, like heart rate will go up, the blood pressure will go up, the in respiratory system, the respiratory rate will grow up, which will grow or will increase, which will dilate blood vessels so that blood actually can flow easily. Or metabolic effects, because your blood glucose metabolic rate will increase, so your blood glucose will make I mean more and more blood glucose will be released from liver, because you need that energy, you need that extra energy if you're stressed. So that's kind of short term stress, right? So typical responses of the sympathetic system. But what happens if we have form of a long term stress? For example, a person is starving, not eating for a long time. So what that happens, not heavily different from what happens in here, but the main thing is our body gets adapted to the situation. Okay, so what it does, the stresses causes more and more CRH to be released. CRH causes obviously more ACTH to be released from anterior pituitary. ACTH travels to adrenal gland, and then it creates more glucocorticoid and more mineralocorticoid than normal it is produced. So glucocorticoid are the one that will create the metabolic effects. For example, it will actually create more blood vessels, will release more protein from muscles, it will release more glucose from liver, because glucose is stored in liver, or will help in fat breakdown, because if we are not eating, if you're in starvation, then the stored products will be now used. In terms of the mineralocorticoid, the renal effects will be created like aldosterone. What it will do, it will try to retain more and more sodium in body, because that sodium we typically get from outside food. So because we're not eating, so therefore the body will try and really do more and more sodium retention in our body. It is also required for maintenance of our blood pressure. Sodium is heavily important, right, for the osmolarity maintenance. So that can happen with the stress. So not really different, the pathway is not really different, it's just little bit stress. This is a long term stress response, you can say. The next one is a pineal gland, which is a tiny little gland in our hair, in our brain, and the third, hanging from the third ventricle. Pinealocytes in brain actually creates of the pineal gland. Pinealocytes are in the pineal gland, they create melatonin, which is nothing but derived from serotonin. So this actually controls our day night cycle. First of all, sexual maturation, puberty, different rhythmic variations like temperature, sleep, appetite, all of that. And then also produces antioxidants in our body. Super important. The next one will talk about the pancreas and the pancreatic hormones, and finally the gonadal hormones. And we'll also talk about the other hormones that are produced from non-endocrine organs like heart, kidney, or even skin. So, but they are obviously produced in small amounts. So, first we'll talk about the pancreatic hormone. So, this is a triangular gland located behind the stomach. We do know that pancreas has an exocrine function as well as an endocrine function. So what is the exocrine function? The acinar cells produces an enzyme rich juice that is required for digestion, right? So these are the acinar cells, but you will see this pancreatic islet. Within this islet, or it is also called as islets of Langerhans, these islet actually will have the endocrine cells. You should be able to see the slides in lab. Will have alpha cells as well as beta cells. The alpha cells, which are the darker stained cells, sorry, the darker cells, stained cells, these ones, they produce glucagon, which is a hyperglycemic hormone, and then the other one, which is not so much so darkly stained, which are these ones, which are the beta cells. They actually produce the insulin, which produces the anti effect of here, this one, okay, which produces, or maybe this bunch of cells, these are all beta cells. They produce insulin, which is the hypoglycemic hormone. So they are like work in opposition with each other, right? So insulin and glucagon, they're antagonistic hormones. So glucagon, extremely potent hyperglycemic agent, um, means that it is triggered by decreased blood glucose. So when we have low sugar, low glucose, then glucagon will work. And what it will do, the first thing it will do to try to break down glycogen from liver, right? And glycogen is stored in liver. It will adapt a process called glycogenolysis. Lysis means breaking down of glycogen. And what it will break into glucose. Then also it will, if we are too much short, then it will start breaking up glucose from lactic acid and other non-carbohydrate sources. And that process is called as gluconeogenesis, means new source of glucose. Genesis means production, neo means new, and gluco is from glucose, so new source of glucose. So all of these processes actually will release glucose in blood. Insulin, on the other hand, is just the opposite one. So when it's secreted when we have high levels of sugar or glucose, it is the precursor is called as proinsulin. Insulin actually lowers the blood glucose level. And what it does, it first of all, it can enhance the membrane transport of glucose into fat and muscle cells. It can inhibit the breakdown of glycogen to glucose. So it can store glycogen in the liver so that no more glucose is released. Or it can inhibit the conversion of amino acids or fats into glucose, or store them as amino acids or fats into muscles or liver. Right, so this is the quick pathway. If you have balanced sugar, normal blood sugar, which is about 90 to 100, 90 milligram per 100 ml, that's fine. If it goes imbalance, if it's too high, then insulin will kick in, and that will be produced by the pancreatic cells, right? And now what will happen, it will stimulate the uptake by cell membranes, or it will be, the glucose will be stored as glycogen in the liver, so that the glucose level falls down to normal level. Or if it's too low, then again glucagon will be released from pancreas, and that will do exactly the opposite. It will start releasing the glycogen from liver into the blood, and will start creating more glucose. Okay, and that will rise the glucose level in our blood. This is a pretty important figure to remember. Now, there are homeostatic imbalance can be caused by glucose. For example, diabetes mellitus. It can be type 1 or type 2. Type 1 is nothing but less secretion of insulin, and hypoactivity of insulin is type 2. Hyposecretion means insulin is produced less only, and hypoactivity means insulin is working too much in this case. Okay, the effect might be similar, because hyposecretion means there is less insulin, means more sugar being available, and hypoactivity means then too much of less activity of insulin is happening, means more sugar, but the mechanism of working is different here. Three cardinal signs, for example, polyuria, huge urine output in polyuria, means glucose act as an osmotic diuretic, means lots of urine is produced. Polydipsia means excessive thirst, means you lose a lot of water. Or polyphagia, these are actually signs or symptoms in DM. Polyphagia means excessive hunger in food, which means the cells are unable to take up glucose, so they are always hungry, so you feel hungry all the time. The last set of endocrine is gonad and the placenta. So gonad actually produces the same sex hormones as the adrenal gland, which is nothing in females. It's this is for females, right? Will produce estrogen and progesterone, which helps in maturation of reproductive organs, then appearance of secondary sexual characteristics during puberty. For progesterone, it will also help in breast development or development of uterine layers, uterine mucosa during menstruation. In males, it will produce testosterone, which will basically initiate the maturation of male reproductive organ, male sexual secondary sexual characteristics during puberty, necessary for sperm production. These are also necessary for egg production as well, or ovum production, and then also maintains the reproductive organs in functional state. All of them will. In males, it will be testosterone. In estrogen, progesterone will do the same thing in females. Placenta will secrete estrogen, progesterone, and human chorionic gonadotropin or HCG hormone actually. Now we have other organs also which are not necessarily endocrine, but they do produce hormones. For example, adipose tissue produces leptin, resistin. Our GI tract produces gastrin, which secretin CCK helps in digestion. Heart producing atrial natriuretic peptide ANP. Kidney produces renin. Renin is an important hormone, and erythropoietin. Skeleton produces osteocalcin, skin produces calcitriol, thymus produces thymolene, and so on. You don't have to go into a whole lot of details in this, in these, like in functions of this. If you know at least one example from each, that should be more than enough. Now your last set of concept checks. So firstly, what is the difference between T3 and T4? The difference is in iodine. We already discussed about that. And which one is thyroxine? The T4 is the thyroxine, right? Which adrenal hormone is responsible for maintaining appropriate sodium levels? Which is the aldosterone. Hypoglycemia means less sugar, right? Is the activity of which hormone? The hormone that actually cuts down glucose too much, okay, which is insulin. And we did talk about in Cushing's disease as well. It is caused by one particular type of hormone, hypersecretion of one particular hormone, and we discussed about that. So go back and look into the lecture and figure that out. All right. So since we finished this, we will also do a quick recap of what we just discussed. Since we just finished chapter 16, you will submit the concept checks by the due date. Okay, so the concept checks will be typically due when we finish the chapter. After that, these concept checks will be due. For you guys, this will be due on every Monday morning. All right. Now these are practice questions. You don't you can, but you don't have to submit these along with the concept checks. So concept checks are due by Monday morning, but because our semester started on 8th, and so the first concept check of endocrine system will be due Monday morning, which is 15th, because 15th Monday morning, or 15th end of the day basically. All right, so you will have enough time to work on it and then submit them. All right, so these are the practice questions. If you want, you can submit them. If you don't want, you don't have to submit them along with the concept checks. So this kind of summarizes the location of the endocrine gland. For example, we do know that pineal gland is located in our brain. Number 1 will be the hypothalamus, 2 will be the pituitary. Number 4 is in our neck region on a trachea, that's the thyroid. Okay. So this is the hypothalamus. I'm not writing the full name. This is the pituitary gland. This is the thyroid. These are the suprarenal glands, or basically the adrenal glands, right? That's the pancreas. This is the female one, so that's the female gonad, which is basically the ovary, and in male this will be the testis. So this just shows you the physical location of all these endocrine glands, right? The next one is actually, you can actually practice, use this figure and practice this later on also. It shows you all the hypothalamic hormones, then shows you all the anterior pituitary hormones, and then the target organs and their hormones. So, and their target organs, not the hormones. So for example, PRH actually stimulates the anterior pituitary to create prolactin that affects the mammary gland to produce milk. Similarly, GHRH, which is growth hormone releasing hormone, is secreted from the hypothalamus, that secretes growth hormone from anterior pituitary, which affects the liver and all over the and other body. Similarly, you can figure out what happens when CRH is secreted from hypothalamic, then what is the anterior pituitary hormone, because it's target organ in adrenal cortex. Similarly, if the target organ is gonad, and then what will be the anterior pituitary hormone, provided the hypothalamic hormone is gonadotropic releasing hormone, or GnRH. That's the anterior pituitary. In posterior pituitary, directly the two hormones are released. One is ADH, the other one of course is the oxytocin. So oxytocin affects the mammary glands and then the uterine muscles, because it helps in milk formation as well as in uterine contraction. ADH also affects one organ, because think about the function, it helps in urine production. So now figure out which is it, what is its target organ. All right, so we'll stop here, and I'm going to upload these practice questions as well. Again, your concept check will be due by the 15th of next week, which is next Monday. You can finish up all the concept checks and submit. If you want, you can submit these practice questions also, but this is just for your practice. All right, use this for practice.